We are the last lesson of the quarter and the last lesson for this go-around in Genesis. We have 3 chapters that are in our text, whether we get to all of them or not. I sort of hope so. But we'll wrap up this study, and then next Sunday we'll begin the new quarter in Matthew. We'll have 2 quarters in Matthew. So I have very much enjoyed the study during this quarter. All of the looking at the life of Abraham, Jacob, Isaac and Jacob, and Joseph, sons of Jacob, or Israel. They're all very familiar stories to those that have been in church for the majority of their lives. But there is so much for us to first learn from their lives and God dealing with them, and to apply to our own life. Remember, our study is for us to learn, but more importantly, it's to apply. You can't apply it. You really don't learn it until you apply it. That's what they say. You don't know anything until you apply it in your life. And I know, from doing training at work, that was always the case there. You really didn't. We did a 3-month training class, 8 hours a day for, every day for 3 months. And when they stepped out on the floor, they still didn't know it. They had to begin to work it. We assigned them to an assistant supervisor for 6 months, and then they went into a team and they worked for 2 years. Life is an ongoing challenge of learning and applying. The great thing about God's Word is every bit of it that we learn and apply becomes a blessing for us as we apply it, as we put it into place. We see that in the lives of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and his 12 sons. We see the challenges and problems. They were not perfect men. Brother Evans and I went down to the campgrounds this past Tuesday. Helped David load up some tools so he could come back and help me at the house. Actually, I was helping him. He was the brains, and I tried as much as possible to be the labor. But, we talked about that quite a bit on the way down there. Anyway, these were not perfect men. But as they learned and grew in their relationship with God, they were blessed men of God. And the blessings that were given to them have passed right on down through time, through Israel, through Jesus Christ, the Savior of the world, and on to us, we Gentiles, non-Jews. We have been blessed through the nation of Israel, beginning back at the calling of Abraham. All right. Title lesson is Promises for the Future. The text is Genesis 48 through 50. Again, we'll get as far as we can get. We'll see. The key verse, Brother Robinson in the Sunday School Quarterly identifies Genesis 50 and 20. But as for you, ye thought evil against me, but God meant it unto good to bring to pass as it is this day to save much people alive. And that's Joseph. If we get that far in the lesson, we'll see that after 17 years in Egypt, Joseph's brothers were still scared. Now, why were they scared? Well, they had plotted to kill him. They wound up selling him into slavery. Didn't know if he was alive or dead. And then they found out he was alive and was, just as the dream given to Joseph had said, he was in an exalted position, and they were subservient to him. He could have snapped his fingers, and they would have all been dead. They carried that fear with them that entire time. 17 years, in spite of all the goodness, in spite of what Joseph had to say, their fear was when Jacob, our father, dies, then will be our comeuppance. So just keep in mind, your past finds you out. It's not hidden from God. God knows. And so we have to deal with those things in our past. All right. The application, the student will comprehend the importance of acceptance and forgiveness and forgive others as Christ has forgiven us. And there's a New Testament parable, it's a story given by Jesus of a rich man who had a servant that owed him much money. And the rich man, his master said, "Pay up what thou owest, or I'll put you in prison." He couldn't do it, and he begged for forgiveness, for more time. The master forgave him of all that he owed, much. And then what did that servant do? He turned around to another servant, and that small amount that was owed, he demanded of him and cast him in prison. When the master found it out, then he then turned back to that servant and said, "I forgave you for much, and you required of this that owed you very little." That is us and God. God has forgiven us of much. He sent his Son on the cross to die for our sins and has forgiven us so much. We should, in turn, be forgiving to those that owe us, that do us wrong. And that's part of the lesson that, again, hope we'll look at this morning as we get into this. Let's start at chapter 48. Chapter 47, we have there Joseph bringing his family into Egypt. They were given the choices of the land in Goshen. And for the next 17 years, Jacob, who had a lot of conflict and strife throughout his life, challenges throughout his life, he lived that last 17 years in relative peace. This is coming down to the conclusion of his life, and then sort of sums up the end of the writing of Genesis. Let's go ahead and have somebody read the first 7 verses of Genesis chapter 48.
After these things, that one told Joseph, "Behold, thy father is sick," and he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And one told Joseph and said, "Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee, and Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed. And Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan, and blessed thee. And said unto me, Behold, I will make thee fruitful and multiply thee, and I will make thee a multitude of people. And will give this land to thy seed, and after thee an everlasting possession. And now thy 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine, as Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. And thy issue which thou begettest after them shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren and inheritance. And as for me, when I came from Padan, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried her there in the land of Ephrath. The same is Ephrath."
All right. So we take a look at, and chapter 48 begins with, "And it came to pass." So some time has passed, and it's approximately 17 years that actually passes from 47 to 48. "Came to pass after these things that one told Joseph, Behold, thy father is sick. And he took with him his 2 sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. Now, while in Egypt, Joseph was given a wife by the Pharaoh, and that was the daughter of the priest On. 2 sons were born to Joseph, Manasseh being the eldest, and Ephraim, the next eldest. Verse 2 tells us, "One told Jacob and said, Behold, thy son Joseph cometh unto thee, and Israel strengthened himself and sat upon the bed." So here we get sort of an idea of the condition of Jacob. By this point, Jacob is approximately 147 years old. That's a pretty ripe old age. Like I said last week, based on that, I haven't hit my midlife crisis yet. So if you see me drive up in a Corvette, it doesn't mean I've hit my midlife crisis, it means I stole some money. All right. But 147 is a ripe old age for us today. But you remember his comment to Pharaoh when asked about his age is, I'm just a young pup. You know, he was 130 years old at that time. Said, my grandfather Abraham was 175 when he passed, and my son Isaac was 180 when he passed, so, you know, but he counted himself as old, even though if he lived to those terms, he would have lived 45 or 50 more years. Why did he count himself as old? He lived a tough life. He was on the run a lot. Keep in mind, the name Jacob is what? Deceiver, supplanter, trickster. He was renamed by God to Israel, which is Prince of God. And so you see two different Jacobs, two different attitudes, two different approaches. But it didn't mean, just because he put his faith and trust in God, did not mean that he did not have to pay for his raising, right? For the sins that he had committed in this life. And that's true of us. You know, as we sin in this life, we certainly can and should go to God for forgiveness for those sins, but don't think that they won't have their adverse effects on us physically. They will. You know, if you do something, if you put your hand on a stove, it's going to leave a mark. A hot stove. It's going to leave a mark. I put my hand on a cold stove and it left a mark. We were trying to carry it into the house, and it started to tumble, and I reached real quick, and I caught a sharp edge. Just sliced that finger pretty good. So, anyway. We pay for those comeuppance. He said, so Jacob is old here. He sits up in bed, so he's not, I don't know that he's completely bedridden, but, the fact is that that's where he seems to spend most of his time, is the implication. Verse 3, and Jacob said unto Joseph, God Almighty appeared unto me at Luz in the land of Canaan and blessed me. Now he's saying this to Joseph, but keep in mind, Manasseh and Ephraim are with him, and while Jacob's other sons are familiar with all of this information, Joseph very well missed quite a bit because he was sold into bondage. He was taken to Egypt. And so there is this gap of time that he really didn't know what was going on with his family. And so this is being recounted both to Joseph and to Manasseh and Ephraim. Verse 4, and said unto me, and this is Jacob, and said unto me, God appeared to him, we told that. He said unto me, behold, I will make thee fruitful, and multiply thee, and I will make of thee a multitude of people, and will give this land to thy seed after thee for an everlasting possession. Now, what is Jacob repeating here to Joseph? This is the same promise as that's right, Abraham and Isaac. And he's carrying this on. Keep in mind, they didn't have the scriptures. They didn't have the writings. Typically, what they passed on had to be passed on by word of mouth. And it had to be repeated over and over and over again. We find that even today, where history is recorded, people are going back and changing it. There are those that deny the Holocaust. There are those that deny the moon landing. There are those that deny. There is a lot of history denial that's going on today. Rewriting of history. We're writing out all of our forefathers, American forefathers, out of the history books because they weren't politically correct according to today's political standards. What do you think that's going to mean if the Lord delays his coming 100 years? What's going to happen with all these people that are doing this today? Gone. Gone. So what comes around goes around. All right, anyway, getting off a little bit. So this is something that he's sharing again with Joseph and Ephraim and Manasseh. Manasseh being the oldest. Verse 5. And now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine. As Reuben and Simeon, they shall be mine. Now, what is he saying there? What's he mean when he says, Manasseh and Ephraim are mine? Whose sons were they? Joseph's. But Jacob is saying,
He was taking them as his own.
I'm adopting them. I am adopting them as my sons. Now, why is that important? Why is that significant?
He gave them an equal share of the land of Canaan when they did take it.
That's exactly right. He gave them an equal share, just like Jacob's other sons, in place of Joseph. So Joseph, his portion was divided among, or the portions were divided among all the sons minus Joseph, with two portions going Ephraim and Manasseh, which meant, in essence, Joseph received two portions. Two portions. Just like what tradition would give to whom? The oldest, the firstborn. You see a pattern going here. Again, Ishmael was the oldest. Isaac received the inheritance and the blessing. And you see Esau was the oldest. Jacob was the younger. And Jacob received that blessing and inheritance. And now you see with Jacob's sons, it wasn't the oldest, which was Reuben, but it was Joseph, through his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. So they were as Jacob's own sons. Verse 5, now thy two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh, which were born unto thee in the land of Egypt, before I came unto thee into Egypt, are mine as Reuben and Simeon, my two oldest, they shall be mine. And thy issue, in other words, thy lineage, those that come after you, which thou begettest after them, shall be thine, and shall be called after the name of their brethren in their inheritance. So, in other words, any other sons that Joseph had would have fallen under Ephraim and Manasseh in that line of inheritance. Verse 7, and as for me, when I came from Padan Aram, is what we saw earlier when it was called out, Rachel died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was but a little way to come unto Ephrath, and I buried her there in the way of Ephrath, the same as Bethlehem. Now, why is he calling this out? Why is he identifying Rachel in particular? There's a few reasons.
That was his first choice.
That's right. Rachel was the wife that he loved. Yes, and it was Joseph's mother. And so, particular interest to Joseph. Again, depending on where you believe that they were when Rachel died, when Joseph went back to check on his brothers. Some believe they were living still at Shechem before the incident occurred with Simeon and Levi. And some believe it was after that when they had moved on down into Hebron. So depending on that, depends on where all of these events lie. And I can't tell you for sure one or another. But here he's recounting for them the wife that he loved, Rachel. The mother of Joseph died by me in the land of Canaan in the way, when yet there was a little way to come to Ephrath, and I buried her there in the way of Ephrath, the same as Bethlehem. Now, is that where they dwelt eventually? No. They moved on south. But she was buried there. Now, what's interesting about that?
That's where Christ was born.
That's That's where Christ was born. But going back to, where was Jacob eventually buried? In the cave of Machpelah. Abraham and Sarah were buried there. Who else was buried there? Isaac and Rebekah. And we'll find when Jacob dies, where is he buried? Yeah, with his first wife, Leah, they were buried there. And then Joseph's bones were carried out of Egypt, and we're jumping ahead, but Joseph's bones were carried out of Egypt and buried also there. But Rachel was not. Rachel was buried there. Now, I don't know what significance that might have, but it was very interesting to me. Again, going back, I don't believe that God's plan was for Jacob to have 4 wives. Genesis tells me it wasn't. He should have 1 wife, and the 2 of them should have lived their lives together through death, till death. Is that the reason that Rachel was buried there? I have no idea. But anyway, it sort of struck me. A lot of things strike me, some harder than others. All right, beginning of verse 8. And Israel beheld Joseph's sons and said, "Who are these?" Now, what's that tell you? Yeah, his eyes were going. I don't know if he wore glasses. Probably not. No, they didn't have glasses back then. Okay. So he was just stuck. I find that my glasses are limiting. They can only do so much. But he, like his father Isaac, you remember Jacob tricked his father with the birthright. Well, Jacob, in turn, was tricked by his sons with the coat of Joseph. But also here, later in life, his eyesight was given way. Verse 9, and Joseph said unto his father, "They are my sons, whom God hath given me in this place." And he said, "Bring them, I pray thee, unto me, and I will bless them." Now the eyes of Israel were dim for age, so that he could not see. And he brought them near unto him, and he kissed them and embraced them. And Israel said unto Joseph, "I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God had showed me also thy seed." We'll pause here just real quick. So he doesn't recognize them simply because his eyesight's gone. How old are they by this point? I don't know, but they were already born before Joseph's brothers, his family, came into Egypt. That had been 17 years ago, so these were not little bitty kids. You know, they were young men. I started to say young strapping men, but I don't know that. They probably were. His eyes were dim for age. He kissed them, embraced them. Now he's sitting on his bed. So in all likelihood they were kneeled down so that, or bent over, one of the two, so that he could do that. I had not thought to see thy face, and lo, God hath showed me also thy seed. So in other words, after all these years I thought you were dead. I never thought I would see you. And here I am, not only seeing you, figuratively, but also your sons. Verse 12. And stop me if you've got anything, because there's a lot in here. Verse 12. And Joseph brought them out from between his knees. Now, one writer says that the actual, it doesn't mean that they were there between his knees as little kids, but against his knees, could have been inside, outside, whatever. But again, in all likelihood, they were stooped down for Jacob. Between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. Joseph brought them, this is Joseph, brought them out from between his knees, and he bowed himself with his face to the earth. And Joseph took them both, Ephraim in his right hand, toward Israel's left hand. So this would be Jacob or Israel's left hand, Ephraim, and Manasseh in his left, Joseph's left hand, toward Israel's right hand. Ephraim in the right and Manasseh in the left. Right and left, okay, very good. That's not important unless you're putting a kitchen together, I don't know. He brought them near unto him. Jacob stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head, who was the younger, and his left hand upon Manasseh's head. Now, well, we'll read it and then we'll talk about it. Guiding his hands wittingly, for Manasseh was the firstborn. So Manasseh was the firstborn. Therefore, he wanted to place Jacob's right hand upon Manasseh, the oldest. And they wanted the left hand on Ephraim's head, the younger. Why?
The right hand was usually the stronger.
That's right. Arm of strength. It was the one that they used to give the firstborn blessing, inheritance. Jacob stretched out his right hand and laid it upon Ephraim's head. Now Ephraim is over here. How did he do that? He did this. And then he took his left hand and he did this. Now, why? Well, we're going to be told. It says here, guiding his hands wittingly. In other words, he knew where each was positioned. And he intentionally crossed his hands like this. Verse 15, and he blessed Joseph and said, God before whom my fathers Abraham and Isaac did walk, the God who fed me all my life let me redo that. The God who fed me all my life long unto this day, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. So here he's giving them blessing. And, now keep in mind, Joseph is there, kneeled before him, and when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him. Why did it displease him? According to the custom, the oldest was the one that received that firstborn double blessing. It wasn't unknown to the sons either. I mean, they knew what the customs were. They had expectation, just like Esau and Jacob understood, had certain expectation, and then Jacob connived in receiving his. And I want to allow, when I say that, Jacob connived in receiving that blessing, it was with the full knowledge and understanding of God. It was based on God's desire. Verse 16, the angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them, and the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac, and let them grow into a multitude in the midst of the earth. And when Joseph saw that his father laid his right hand upon the head of Ephraim, it displeased him, and he held up his father's hand to remove it from Ephraim's head unto Manasseh's head. And Joseph said unto his father, not so, my father, for this is the firstborn. Put thy right hand upon his head. And his father refused and said, I know it, my son, I know it. He also shall become a people, and he also shall be great. But truly his younger brother shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. So what's Jacob saying here about the two sons? He's giving a blessing.
The younger one's going to be the one that made blessing.
He's actually saying that Manasseh, the oldest, the firstborn, is going to be great. And he's going to receive blessings. But Ephraim will be greater. He also shall become great. Become a people, and he shall also be great, speaking of Manasseh. But truly, his younger brother, which was Ephraim, shall be greater than he, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. Jeremiah 31:9, we won't turn there, refers to Ephraim being the firstborn. Now, there, it refers to Ephraim being the firstborn of whose children? Not Joseph's, Jacob's. Why? Because not only did Ephraim receive the firstborn blessing, his father, Joseph, but this firstborn blessing goes to, it's coming from Jacob. It supplanted Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and all the rest of the direct sons of Jacob. So it wasn't just Manasseh that was being passed over, but it was Jacob's other sons. So he skips a generation and is passed over them. All right. Verse 20, and he blessed them that day, saying, in thee shall Israel bless, saying, and keep in mind that Israel is Jacob's name. In thee shall Israel bless, saying, God make thee as Ephraim and as Manasseh. And he set Ephraim before Manasseh. And Israel said unto Joseph, behold, I die, but God shall be with you, and bring you again unto the land of your fathers. In other words, his expectation, this is 17 years in Egypt, his expectation is that not only Jacob would be brought back out after he passed, but that Joseph and the rest of the family would be brought back out. It would take a long time for that to be accomplished, but it would happen. Now, as mentioned before, they go in as a family and they come out as a large nation. Verse 22, moreover, I have given to thee one portion above thy brethren, which I took out of the hand of the Amorite with my sword and with my bow. What's he talking about here? Don't know. This may very well be an incident that's not recorded in Genesis. Keep in mind, we're talking about the lives of individuals that lived 175 years, 180 years, 147 years. Was everything that they did captured in these chapters? No. Again, there was more captured about these three men and their descendants than there was the entire human race for several thousand years leading up to the flood. And quite a bit of time from Noah down to Abraham. There's time in there. But there is a lot of time spent on these three individuals. And when you go back over to Hebrews chapter 11, what do we find? They're accounted for in that listing of great men of faith, great men and women of faith. There in Hebrews. So their lives were very important to the fulfillment of God's will. How about yours? How important is your life in fulfilling the will of God? You know, most of us would probably say, well, it's less important than theirs. Well, I guess that depends. It depends on your approach. I don't know that God deems your life and his plan for your life less important than theirs. We may. You know, we oftentimes look at the Pauls and these great saints of old, and we say, well, they're different. Well, the only thing that made them different was their faith and their surrender to God. Each of us should have that same desire and drive to surrender our lives to God today. You know, they lived in times of challenge, but we live in times of challenge today. You look around at our world and, you know, to me, it feels like it's crumbling. It's falling apart. I have a purpose for being here. I need to fulfill it according to God's will in my life. I need to set aside the petty things, material things of this life, and look to do God's will. He'll take care of me. He took care of these men. But the problem is we get so sidetracked with, you know, we'll leave here this afternoon, and our first thought will be, what's for lunch? I know that's mine. You know, what's for lunch? You know, it's a fried chicken. I'm all about fried chicken. And then, you know, we move on, and it's the next thing that's coming into our life. Why do you think that is? Because Satan likes it like that. He likes to divert our attention away from the things of God and to the things of this world. And too oftentimes, we so easily acquiesce. We give in. You know, we'll sit down in front of the TV and watch something. We'll go off to work and we'll do our thing, not really paying attention to what is that testimony that I'm giving. What's that life that I'm showing to others? What's my witness to others? Who might be missing out on hearing the gospel of Jesus Christ because I decided it just wasn't very important at that moment. So, all right, 2 more chapters. I'll have to squeeze them. We'll see. Chapter 49. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Now, in the last days, what are the last days? It depends who's speaking and what are they speaking about. You know, in the New Testament, the last days, we see that Jesus Christ told them they were living in the last days. That was 2,000 years ago. They were in the last days. What were the last days? Well, the last days were those days of decline and imminent Lord return. Keep in mind, God is not subject to time like we are. So, the last days. Now, these last days really cover different time frames. You know, as you look, there are things that he's going to tell them that are specific to them individually, and things that are specific to their descendants individually in Israel, and it will also move right on to the Messiah, Jesus Christ, and his coming, and those last days. So, as you look at this, let God's word speak, not preconceived. And it helps to understand it. So he says, these are the things that shall befall you in the last days. Verse 2, Gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. So here he identifies both names. He was born and given the name of Jacob. And again, we talked about that, supplanter, trickster, deceiver. But God gave him a new name, Israel, which is Prince of God. So he's really identifying 2 distinct times in his life. Don't get me wrong. It's not that when God appeared to Jacob at Luz, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden Jacob's life was turned upside down and he went from being a complete sinner to being perfect. It didn't happen. Our lives are continuing growth if we will focus and do as God would have us to do. It's not, we were this today and tomorrow we're that. He goes on here. Verse 3, he begins with Reuben, who is the oldest, but as we go through this, you'll see he starts out looking oldest to youngest, but there are some names that are not necessarily in that order. So don't get hung up on that. Reuben, the oldest, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Now, that sounds good. This almost, as he's doing this, it almost sounds like 7 churches of Asia, where the angel of God speaking is giving commendation for what they've done right, and then following with those things that they've done wrong that they need to improve on, work on. Here, this is very similar. Verse 4, Reuben. Now, who is Reuben? He's the oldest, but what do we know about Reuben's past? What was he guilty of? After Rachel died, Rachel had a handmaid, and her name was Bilhah. Rachel died, what did Reuben do? He went in to her tent. She was the wife, and again, it was one of 4 that Jacob had, but she was the wife of Jacob. He had no business going in there. This is Reuben that we're talking about. Unstable as water. And this is like a foaming water. It's like a rushing water. It's looking for an outlet. Thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed. Then defilest thou it. He went up to my couch. So here, Reuben should have been the one receiving that firstborn blessing. He lost the right to it because of his own actions. He can point his finger at anybody he wants to, and we do that a lot, don't we? I do something, man, first thing I want to do is, who can I blame this on? Well, there was nobody Reuben could blame it on except himself. He did it, and this was him reaping his reward. He lost that birthright, that firstborn. Simeon and Levi are the next 2 in line, and they're combined. Simeon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. Now, why does Jacob say that? What did they do? Shechem. What happened at Shechem?
They circumcised all the males and then killed them
Why?
because they had, Shechem had defiled them.
That's right. Shechem had defiled their sister, Dinah. Now, that was wrong. How many of you would have been fighting mad over that? How many of you have sisters? How many of you have sisters? You know, if somebody did something to your sister, how mad would you be? I'd be furious. I'd be ready to, I don't know. Well, they did it. Now, keep in mind, we have to caution our anger, because what does Christ tell us about anger in the New Testament? To hate a brother is the same as to murder them. Sin begins where? In the heart. And the fact that I haven't murdered anybody physically, does that mean that in my mind I might not have been angry enough to? We need to watch our anger. They didn't. They didn't watch their anger, and as Brother Homer said, you know, the men of Shechem, Shechem himself wanted to marry Dinah. But they were furious. They weren't going to have it, and so they said, okay, we'll do that. You get circumcised, and all the men get circumcised, and we'll bring you right on in. Was that their intent? No. They circumcised them, and when they were incapacitated over, you know, it was like the 3rd day, which many say would be the worst time, they went in and killed them. They didn't just kill them. They sacked the place. Yeah. It goes on to say here, verse 6, O my soul, come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly mine honor be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a well. Now another interpretation of that digging down a well is to hamstring an ox. What is hamstringing an ox?
Cut the back of his leg where he can't use the strength of it.
Yeah, so what happens? You eliminate the mobility of the ox. If the ox can't move, what are they going to do? They're going to lay there and die. A torturous death. That's what hamstringing is about. And that's what they did. You know, they took the women and the children that they didn't kill, and they took them as slaves. And they carried away all the spoils that they could, and what they couldn't, they destroyed it. Nobody was going to have any benefit of it. So they also, you know, with Reuben disqualifying himself, Simeon and Levi would have been next in line. They disqualified themselves also. We come to Judah, the fourth son. Verse 7, finishing up on Simeon and Levi. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. So what you find is that Levi is the tribe of whom? The priestly tribe. What land were they given? None. They were scattered among the tribes. But also Simeon, the people of Simeon, the heritage of Simeon, wound up, in the end, scattered also among the tribes. Verse 8, Judah, this is the fourth. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. From the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down, he crouched as a lion, and as an old lion, who shall rouse him? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come, and unto him shall the gathering of the people be. Binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass colt unto the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. Now that's a lot given about Judah. In essence, what's he saying?
Judah would be the one through whom the Messiah came.
That's right. Judah would be greatly blessed. It's the son of Jacob. We see it in the rise of Messiah, Jesus Christ, coming through Judah. All of the true kings of Israel were of what lineage? Judah. Now, there was a king before the kings of Judah began. His name was Saul, and he was from the tribe of Benjamin. But he was not God's choice. He was Israel's choice. God's choice began with David, and the promise of that was through David, and right on up through Jesus Christ, the true king, eternal king. You find here, this blessing given to Judah is very similar to that of a firstborn. And in fact, it's almost as if there is a firstborn blessing that's given to Ephraim, the youngest son of Joseph, and to Judah. They both were greatly blessed. And as you look down in time, the southern, when the kingdom divided, the 12 tribes, 2 to the south and 10 to the north, the south was referred to as Judah, and the north oftentimes was referred to as Ephraim. They were the predominant tribes. We go on quickly. 13, Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for a haven of ships, and his borders shall be undecided. With most of these, there's not a lot of additional information. Some of it is location, some of it is giving information about future challenges to the tribe or blessings of the tribe. Here, they're located between the Sea of Galilee, that land plot, between the Sea of Galilee and the Mediterranean Sea. We move on, and that's described here. The border shall be undecided. Verse 14, Issachar is a strong ass crouching down between two burdens, and he saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and bowed his shoulder bare, and became a servant unto tribute. Issachar, here described as a donkey, one that carried burden, saw that rest was good. Now, there are those that interpret this as Issachar was a little bit on the lazy side, and that oftentimes, as opposed to stepping up, joining in, that they allowed themselves to be overrun, and they wound up servants many times to invading armies. Dan shall judge his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse's heel, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Dan, how many of you remember Samson? What was his role in Israel? He was in during the time of the judges. And he was a judge. He was a judge. Dan shall judge his people. He was not the only one from that tribe of Dan, but we find later on when the northern 10 tribes separated from the southern 2 tribes, Jeroboam put in place what? Idol worship. And one of the main locations of that idol worship was there in Dan. They are guilty of helping to introduce idolatry among the children of Israel. And that's why it says, Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path that biteth the horse's heel, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Gad, a troop shall overcome him, but he shall overcome at the last. Gad is described as one of those tribes that fought very hard with David to overcome the people of the land of Canaan. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, he shall yield royal dainties, describing some of the delectables, the produce from the land of Asher. Naphtali is a hind let loose, he giveth goodly words. A lot of good speech, but not backed up with action. And then we come to Joseph. Remember that Ephraim and Manasseh have already been given their blessings. And so, as you look at those blessings given to them, they really roll up into this blessing given to Joseph. Joseph, beginning in verse 22, is a fruitful bow, even a fruitful bow by a well, whose branches run over the wall. You know, a fruitful bow by a well, in other words, refreshing, and well, where do things grow best? In and near, water. You know, along the Nile, in and near water. Any of those locations. The archers have sorely grieved him. You look at Joseph's life, and he went through a lot of things, and yet he conducted himself as we would understand a Christian today to follow. He didn't seek his own retribution. The archers have sorely grieved him, shot at him, and hated him. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of whom? The mighty God of Jacob. And you'll see here that there are 5 descriptions here. His hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel, even by the God of thy fathers, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty. 5 descriptions of God that are given here in application to Joseph. Again, some of the writers earlier on, when Joseph was younger, they sort of chided him for putting on that really nice coat and wearing it in front of his brothers. They almost accused him of prancing around in it. Chided him about his telling on his brothers. Chided him about being a mama's boy, staying at home while the others were working. There's no indication here of those things. And again, not that Joseph was perfect. Not saying that. Okay. If I see that correctly, my eyes are dim. We're about out of time. So he goes on. The last one is Benjamin. Benjamin is referred to, Benjamin shall be ravenous as a wolf, to shred, to devour. At night he'll divide the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is that their father spake unto them, and blessed them every one according to his blessing he blessed them. We go on, and we find the instruction for his burial in the last part of 49. Chapter 50, he's... Joseph, after he dies, goes to Pharaoh. They have Jacob embalmed. That's a 40-day process, 15 steps to embalming. I've got it if anybody wants. I'm kidding, I don't. Nobody has it. It's gone. But he's embalmed, which was good for a trip like they had to take back to bury Jacob in the land of Canaan. And then we'll find later on, the chapter continues. Later on, Joseph also dies, and he gives instruction for his body also, even though the majority of his life was spent in Egypt, by far. I think Joseph was 110 years old. How long did he live in the land of Canaan? 17. So 93 years he lived in Egypt. Where was home? Canaan. Why? Because it was God's inheritance given to the children of Israel. And that's true of us today. Where is our home? It's not Maryland Heights. It's not St. Charles. It's not, where do you live? That's not where your home is. Not if you're saved.